The history of Egypt begins with geography, specifically the Nile River, because without it there is no Egypt. The Nile flows through otherwise arid land, and its annual flooding deposited fertile silt that allowed early human communities to farm reliably. This predictability mattered more than abundance alone. Because people could anticipate when the floods would come and recede, they could plan agricultural cycles, store surplus grain, and coordinate labor. Over time, these farming communities became permanent settlements, and permanence is what allowed social complexity to develop. Once people were no longer constantly moving in search of food, they began to specialize in different tasks, including construction, craft production, religious service, and administration. As settlements grew, coordination became essential. Irrigation canals had to be maintained, harvests needed to be protected and redistributed, and disputes required arbitration. This led to the emergence of local leaders who held authority not simply through force, but through their ability to organize resources and people. Gradually, leadership became institutional rather than personal. Positions of authority were passed on, formalized and connected to religious ideas about order and balance. By around 3100 BCE, these processes resulted in the political unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, creating one of the world's first centralized states. The Egyptian state was built on the idea that political stability and cosmic order were inseparable. The pharaoh was not merely a king, but the guarantor of Ma'at, a concept that encompassed justice, balance, and the proper functioning of the universe. This belief justified centralized authority and made governance a sacred responsibility. Administrative systems developed to support this structure. Scribes recorded taxes, land ownership, and grain storage. Officials supervised labor projects and regional governance. Writing was not just cultural expression, it was an administrative technology that allowed the state to function across distance and time. Monumental architecture, especially pyramids and temples, reflected this administrative capacity. These were not spontaneous projects, but required years of planning, resource allocation, and labor organization. Archaeological evidence shows that workers were housed, fed, and medically treated, suggesting state-managed labor rather than mass enslavement. The ability to mobilize thousands of people seasonally, especially during agricultural off-seasons, demonstrates how deeply integrated the state was into daily life. These projects reinforced political legitimacy while also serving religious and economic purposes. Egyptian society was not static. Periods of strong central authority alternated with times of fragmentation, known as intermediate periods. These were often triggered by environmental stress, weak leadership, or regional competition. When central power weakened, local governors gained autonomy. However, these periods were not cultural collapses. They often produced administrative reforms and new artistic styles, which later rulers absorbed when reunifying the state. This pattern of centralization, decentralization, and reform repeated across Egyptian history. During the Middle and New Kingdoms, Egypt expanded beyond its traditional borders. Military reforms, including standing armies and improved logistics, allowed Egypt to campaign into Nubia and the Levant. These regions provided valuable resources such as gold, timber, and trade access. Egyptian imperialism reshaped society by introducing foreign labor, tribute systems, and diplomatic relationships. At the same time, Egypt was influenced by the regions it interacted with. Technologies, religious ideas, and artistic styles moved across borders in both directions. Nubia is a key example of this two-way influence. While Egypt often dominated Nubia militarily, Nubian kingdoms retained their own political structures and cultural identities. Eventually, Nubian rulers adopted Egyptian religious and administrative practices, and in the 8th century BCE, ruled Egypt itself as the Kushite, or 25th dynasty. This challenges simplistic narratives of domination and shows that power and culture in the ancient world were fluid. Egypt also faced pressure from larger imperial powers. The Assyrians introduced new models of warfare and governance that destabilized regional balances. Later, the Persian Empire incorporated Egypt as a satrapy, integrating it into a vast imperial economy. Persian rule maintained many Egyptian administrative systems, but redirected resources toward imperial needs. These periods exposed Egyptians to broader political and economic networks while reducing local autonomy. The conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE marked another major transformation. His successors, the Ptolemies, ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. They founded Alexandria, which became a center of learning, trade, and administration. Greek became the language of government and elite culture, while most rural Egyptians continued traditional practices. This created a layered society where multiple identities coexisted. Egyptian religion persisted, but often in hybrid forms that blended Greek and Egyptian traditions. Under Roman rule, Egypt became a critical grain supplier for the empire. Agricultural production was reorganized to meet imperial demands, and taxation intensified. Urban life continued and religious traditions evolved. Christianity spread during this period, particularly in cities and monastic communities. Egyptian monasticism became influential far beyond Egypt, preserving texts and shaping Christian thought during times of political instability. The Arab-Muslim conquest in the 7th century CE introduced new administrative and cultural frameworks. Arabic gradually replaced older languages in official use, and Islam spread over generations. This was not an abrupt cultural erasure. Christian and Jewish communities continued, and many local practices adapted rather than disappeared. Egypt became a central province in successive Islamic empires, with Cairo emerging as a major political and intellectual capital. Later periods, including Mamluk and Ottoman rule, illustrate how military elites, trade networks, and imperial administration shaped Egyptian society. Egypt's strategic position made it economically valuable and politically contested. In the 19th century, reforms under Muhammad Ali Pasha introduced modern military, industrial, and agricultural systems, linking Egypt more tightly to global markets. European intervention followed, culminating in British occupation, which modernized infrastructure while limiting political sovereignty. Modern Egyptian nationalism emerged in response to colonial rule, leading to political mobilization and eventual independence. The 1952 revolution reshaped governance, emphasizing state-led development and national identity. Throughout all these transformations, ordinary Egyptians adapted, preserved traditions, and sustained social life. Egypt's history is not simply a sequence of rulers or empires. It is a continuous process of adaptation, negotiation, and survival shaped by geography, institutions, and human agency.